You are sitting in a rare book room. The lights are low, the table is clean, and a pair of white cotton gloves is lying next to your hand. A librarian brings out a thick medieval codex and places it in front of you with the care of someone handling a sleeping animal. You open it. The pages are covered in ink, hundreds of pages of flowing, elegant script, and you cannot read a single word. You turn to a drawing of a plant. It has roots, leaves, and flowers, but it does not match any plant you have ever seen. You turn another page. A circle of naked women floats in a green pool, connected by tubes that look like plumbing. The text beside them is as strange as the image. This is the Voynich Manuscript, and it has been doing this to people for over a century. It is kept at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale, where it is known as Ms. 408. It has been carbon dated to the early 15th century, roughly between 1404 and 1438. It contains about 104 folios, hundreds of illustrations, and a script that no one has been able to translate. No second copy of the book has ever been found. No dictionary, no key, no Rosetta Stone for its alphabet has ever turned up. There is only the book and you. The book is not enormous. It is roughly the size of a modern laptop, thick enough to feel heavy in the hand. The pages are a soft brown color and the ink has a blue-purple tint in some lights. When you hold it, the mystery feels physical. It is not a rumor, it is a thing. Here is the promise of this video. You are going to meet 3 things. A carbon dating result that says the parchment is real, a statistical analysis that says the text behaves like a language, and a long list of failed decipherments, including some that were almost convincing. By the end, you will understand why the Voynich Manuscript is not just a puzzle. It is a mirror. The standard story goes like this. The manuscript was written in a secret language, or it was encrypted by a genius, or it was a hoax designed to fool a king. Someone just has not cracked it yet. Give it one more generation, and the answer will come. That story is not exactly wrong. It is just incomplete. Let's start with the object itself. The Voynich Manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-American bookseller who bought it in 1912. He found it in a collection of old manuscripts in Italy, and he spent the rest of his life trying to prove that it had once belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II. That part of the story is romantic, but it is also unproven. What is proven is that the manuscript existed by the early 1400s some, because the parchment has a carbon date. The trail before 1912 is thinner. The manuscript was owned by people in the 17th century, and there is an old letter that says Rudolph II bought it for a large sum. That letter is a clue, not a contract. It places the book in the world of royal collectors, where strange objects were traded like trophies. If the letter is accurate, the manuscript was already famous for being strange 400 years ago. The carbon dating was done by Greg Hodgins and his team at the University of Arizona. They took tiny samples from the pages and measured their radiocarbon content. The result came back with a 95% probability that the vellum was made between 1404 and 1438. That is a narrow window for a medieval manuscript, and it matters. It rules out the idea that the book is a modern forgery. The pages are genuinely old. You can trust that much. The book was not born yesterday. That makes the mystery older and stranger. What does a carbon date actually prove? It proves when the animal died. It does not prove when the ink was applied. The parchment could have been made, stored, and written on years later. That is why scholars talk about the book as a 15th century object, not as a document with a precise birthday. The date is a fence, not a fingerprint. Now look at the inside. The script is often called voyniches. It is made up of about 40 distinct characters, arranged into words of different lengths. The text runs left to right, with no punctuation, no page numbers, and no obvious breaks between sentences. It looks like writing, in the way a face looks like a face, but none of the features line up. There are no page numbers. There are no corrections. There are no marginal notes in a known language. It is as if the book was written by someone who wanted it to be self-contained, and then never came back to explain it. The illustrations are divided into sections. There is a herbal section full of plants. There is an astronomical section with stars, suns, and zodiac signs. There is a biological section with naked figures and pools of water. There is a pharmacological section with jars and roots. And there is a section that looks like recipes. Scholars can name the sections, but they cannot agree on what any of them mean. Each section has its own strangeness. The astronomical pages include zodiac symbols, but the constellations are arranged in ways that do not match any known sky. The biological pages show figures connected by tubes, but the bodies are not anatomically useful. The recipe pages have labels, but the labels cannot be read. It is as if someone built a medieval encyclopedia and then replaced all the words with a private script. The strangest detail is the plants. They look like botanical drawings, with stems, leaves, and roots, but almost none of them match known species. Some look like they were assembled from parts of different plants. Others look completely imaginary. If the book is a herbal, where are the real herbs? Maybe the plants are not plants. Maybe they are diagrams of something else, and the stems are just a visual language we lost. That is the kind of question the manuscript keeps asking. Every familiar shape might be a mask. That question is the doorway into the manuscript. For a long time, people assumed that any text can be cracked. The Voynich Manuscript has been attacked by professional cryptographers, amateur code breakers, linguists, mathematicians, and at least one famous literary scholar. The results are almost always the same. Someone announces a breakthrough, the news spreads, and then the translation falls apart. Under scrutiny, the scholars who study it for years describe a strange experience. The script starts to look familiar. The characters begin to feel like old friends. Then you try to read a line, and the feeling evaporates. It is like watching a face you almost recognize, but the name will not come. That experience is not mystical. It is your brain doing what brains do, looking for meaning in a pattern. Why does that keep happening? We do not know what the text is trying to do. It might be a real language written in a cipher. It might be a real language written in a made-up alphabet. It might be an invented language, like a medieval conlang. It might be meaningless text designed to look like language. The hardest part is not the code. It is the fact that we cannot even agree on what kind of puzzle we are holding. Let's look at the evidence for it is a language. Back in 2013, two physicists, Marcelo Montemurro and Damien Zanet, published a study in PLOS ONE. They applied methods from information theory to the manuscript, treating it as a sequence of words and measuring how those words cluster across the text. They found that the distribution of words is compatible with real language. The manuscript has what linguists call low entropy in the right places, and it produces patterns that look like semantic networks. In other words, the text is not uniform noise. It is structured. That is a serious result. It does not prove that the book has a message, but it makes the random gibberish explanation harder to defend. If someone had simply generated nonsense, you would not expect those coherent patterns. And yet, the same statistical methods can be fooled. A person who wants to create the look of language can do it. The question is not whether the patterns exist. It is whether they have a meaning behind them. That is where the Voynich Manuscript becomes philosophical. For you, the pattern is the point. The search is not wasted. It is the whole experience. There is older work in the same direction. Back in 2001, Gabriel Landini used spectral analysis to look for structure in the text. He found evidence of linguistic organization similar to what you would see in a natural language. That was before the information theory study, and it pointed the same way. The text is not just a pile of random squiggles, but there is also evidence for the other side. Back in 2004, Gordon Rugg published a paper in Cryptologia proposing that the manuscript could be a hoax. He showed that a technique called a Cardin grill, a method for generating apparently structured text, could produce sequences that looked like Voyniches. His argument was not that he had proven the manuscript is fake, it was that the hoax hypothesis deserves to be taken seriously. That is the kind of careful wording that does not make headlines, but it is exactly what science is supposed to do. Now here is the uncomfortable part. The statistical evidence for language and the statistical evidence for a possible hoax are both real. They are not contradictory. A well-designed hoax can mimic the surface features of language because the person making it would have followed the same patterns they saw in real writing. So the manuscript sits in a strange middle zone. It looks too organized to be random, and too random to be confidently called language. Back in 2021, Claire Bowen and Luke Lindburn published a review in the Annual Review of Linguistics. They went through the linguistic evidence, the statistical studies, and the history of decipherment claims. Their conclusion was careful. The text is not gibberish in the sense of random characters, but there is no convincing evidence that it encodes a known language in a straightforward way. The manuscript remains undeciphered, and the field has to be honest about that. That review is important because it does something rare in the Voynich world. It says, "We do not know," out loud. Let's talk about the people who say they have solved it. The history of Voynich claims is a museum of overconfidence. One researcher claimed it was a proto-Romance language and produced translations that looked oddly like press releases. Another claimed it was written in Hebrew. Another said it was a medical text from Central Asia. Each claim had a moment of excitement, and each one collapsed when other researchers tried to reproduce the method. The pattern is always the same. A claim is announced, the media runs with it, and the public gets a few days of hope. Then the translators release their full method, and other researchers notice that the method requires too many assumptions, or that the translation ignores half the text, or that the language has no grammar anyone can verify. The claims fail quietly, but they keep coming. Why do the claims keep failing? Here is one reason. The manuscript is short from a statistical point of view. It has a limited amount of text, maybe around 35,000 to 40,000 word tokens, depending on how you count. That is enough to study patterns, but not enough to test a complex cipher with many possible keys. With a small sample, you can fit almost any theory if you try hard enough. The claims that succeed are usually the ones that fit the data after the fact, not the ones that predict it. There is another problem. The text has no punctuation, no spaces between what we would call sentences, and no known grammar to check against. In a normal decipherment, you can test a hypothesis by reading one sentence and seeing if it makes sense. Here, you cannot even decide where one sentence ends. Every theory has to invent its own sentence boundaries, and that is a gift to overconfidence. That is a lesson that goes far beyond one manuscript. It is a warning about how easy it is to see patterns where there are none, and how hard it is to prove that a pattern is real. Let's look at the manuscript's history after 1912. Voynich showed it to cryptographers and scholars hoping for a breakthrough. It passed through several owners. At one point, it was analyzed by teams at the CIA and the NSA because codebreakers could not resist it. The classified analyses were eventually released, and they did not solve anything. The manuscript became famous not because it was decoded, but because it survived every attempt. That is a special kind of reputation. Most objects become famous for what they do. This one became famous for what it refuses to do. It does not matter how many codebreakers sit down with it. It does not matter what algorithms they invent. The book stays quiet. That is a strange kind of fame. Most famous books are famous because people read them. The Voynich manuscript is famous because people cannot. There is a temptation to fill that gap with stories. The manuscript is often described as an alien book, a lost language, or a secret encoded by a forgotten sect. Those stories are fun, but they are also a way of avoiding the actual mystery. The actual mystery is more ordinary and more interesting. It is a medieval book that we simply cannot place. Let's talk about what the carbon date actually tells us. The parchment was made in the early 1400s, but the writing could be later. Parchment can sit unused for years before someone writes on it. The illustrations also have stylistic features that some scholars place in the early Renaissance. The most honest statement is this: the book was probably made in the 15th century in Europe, by someone with access to good vellum, expensive pigments, and a lot of time. That is not a ghost story. That is a workshop. Who made it? We do not know. Why did they make it? Did they intend it to be read? We do not know. The manuscript keeps its secrets, not because it is supernatural, but because it is missing context. No other copy, no author, no patron, no receipt. The maker did not leave a signature. That is common for medieval books, but it feels different here. A normal manuscript has a scribe, a monastery, a city, a trace. This one has nothing. It is a face without a name. Imagine trying to understand a cookbook if you found only one page, with no title, no author, and no ingredient list. That is roughly where we stand with the Voynich Manuscript. Except the book has hundreds of pages, and we still cannot name the language. What would it take to solve it? A second document in the same script would be a huge step, but none exists. A gloss, a translation, or a key would be even better, but none has appeared. Short of that, researchers need a hypothesis that can explain the entire text, the illustrations, and the historical context without ignoring inconvenient pages. That is a much higher bar than a clever-looking translation of a few lines. There is another way to look at the puzzle, and it is the one I find most interesting. The manuscript may be undeciphered, because it was never meant to be deciphered. Some scholars have suggested it could be an early experiment in artificial language, a created writing system that was never used again. Others have suggested it was a work of art, a performance of writing, not a carrier of information. If that is true, then the search for a translation is asking the wrong question. The book is not hiding a message. It is the message. That idea changes the emotional texture of the manuscript. It stops being a locked room and starts being a portrait. Someone in the 15th century spent enormous effort making a book that looks like knowledge, filled with plants, stars, and bodies, but cannot be read. Maybe they were playing. Maybe they were testing the idea of language. Maybe they were making a point about how much we trust the look of a page. If that is true, the book worked. You trust that it looks like knowledge. That is the trick. The art theory has a practical appeal. It explains why the plants are imaginary, why the script is consistent, and why no second copy exists. A performance does not need a dictionary. A portrait does not need a translation. The book could be a medieval meditation on writing itself. We cannot know, and that is the point. The Voynich Manuscript is one of the few objects in the world that is more honest than we are. It does not pretend to be readable. It sits in the Beinecke library, being photographed, studied, and occasionally subjected to another confident translation. Every few years, someone says they have cracked it. The manuscript does not change, the claims do. Keep watching. The next claim is already on the way. Some books resist. That is not a defect. It is a feature. Let's think about what that says about us. We are pattern-seeking animals. When we see a page full of text, we assume there is a message. When we see a plant, we assume it has a name. When we see a book, we assume it was meant to be read. The Voynich Manuscript breaks all three assumptions at once, and our brains do not like that. We keep trying to force it back into the category of book with a hidden message, because the alternative is unsettling. That is not a flaw. It is a tool. The same instinct that makes us see faces in clouds is the instinct that built language, science, and art. It is also the instinct that keeps people trying to crack this book. Without it, we would not care. With it, we cannot stop. The alternative is that some books are not for us. That does not mean the manuscript is worthless. It means its value is different. It is a window into the medieval mind, a physical object made by human hands, preserved through centuries, carrying a script that no one owns. It has outlived every attempt to explain it, and it will probably outlive us. It will outlast your curiosity too. Here is the part I want you to remember. The next time you see a page you cannot read, your first instinct will be to feel frustrated. That is fine. Frustration is part of being human. But there is another option. You can let the unreadable page be unreadable and ask what that tells you about yourself. So is wonder. You can be curious without needing an answer. You wanted the key. The key is not in the book. It is in the desire. That is why the Voynich Manuscript matters. It is not a failure of cryptography. It is a lesson in epistemology, wrapped in ink and vellum. It is also a lesson in patience. Real knowledge often looks like confusion for a long time. You have to sit with the confusion before the shape appears. The book is the code, not the message. And the strangest plant in that herbal section, it is still waiting for you. It has waited this long. It can wait for you. The page will still be there when the world stops asking. It is not going anywhere. Neither is the question.